is your 10-minute warning. Big Ten TED Live starts in 10 minutes. Welcome, Big Ten fans. This is Big Ten Ted Live. And welcome to another edition of Big Ten Ted Live. I'm your host, Ted, and just getting some audio right here. There we go. We got it going on. It is Big Ten Ted Live. Here off to a little bit of a rocky start here in the renovated, move to the basement Big Ten Ted Studios. Hope everybody's having a good one out there today. It should be a great weekend of Big Ten football. Going to be talking about it here on Big Ten Ted Live. We're going to be talking about Week 12 matchups. Should be some interesting matchups here around the Big Ten, especially with the story that Casey Thompson might be playing. He's listed as probable right now. Mickey Joseph says unless something drastic happens, Casey Thompson is likely to go for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. So that could really change the line. That could really change how people like me look at this matchup between the Nebraska Cornhuskers and the Wisconsin Badgers. So we'll take a look at those Week 12 matchups. We'll also, speaking of Nebraska, we'll also take a look at Matt Rhule. Okay, the rumor mill has really been churning for Nebraska football, and is Matt Rhule the guy, former Carolina Panthers head coach, and of course a guy that rebuilt Baylor in the Big 12 Conference, that rebuilt Temple in the American Athletic Conference? This is a guy that's got a good track record of rebuilding programs, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Nebraska needs a guy that has experience head coaching and definitely has experience rebuilding programs. So that's the kind of guy that the Nebraska Cornhuskers need right now. So we'll talk about Matt Rhule. That should be a fun conversation because you had to imagine once we got into early November, once we got into mid-November, that we were going to have a situation where the rumor mills were going to really heat up. And just when you think you know what's going on, maybe you don't. That's also something to keep in mind. Remember last year when we thought Lincoln Riley was headed to LSU, but instead he goes out west to USC, and Brian Kelly out of nowhere lands at LSU. Maybe there's a situation going on. I saw this on Twitter that there's been conversation about Lane Kiffin to Auburn. I'm not saying Kiffin's going to land in Lincoln. I'm not saying Lincoln is going to be the next head coach in Nebraska. All I'm saying is we've seen this type of stuff in the past. So we'll talk about that and the Big Ten West madness. And man, there is a lot of Big Ten West madness. There's a lot of scenarios that could go down over in the Big Ten West. So, man, you got to talk about that, right? You got to talk about what's happening over there in the Big Ten West because there is a lot going on out west in the Big Ten West. So we'll talk about that. Okay, let's get into some Week 12 matchups here. And first one I want to start with, let's start with that one we just talked about. Let's start with Wisconsin and Nebraska because when you look at this matchup between the Badgers and the Huskers, now that Casey Thompson, it looks like we lost Chubba Purdy for the rest of the season. Not too big of a loss. I thought they should have been playing Logan Smothers to begin with, but obviously that didn't happen. You look at Chubba Purdy now gone. Now if the rumors are true, and well, they're not really rumors since it was addressed at the press conference by Mickey Joseph, but if Casey Thompson is able to go, I think that really makes this game a lot different, being in Lincoln, Nebraska. Now I will say this Wisconsin defense has really stepped up as of late. Keanu Benton is playing really good right now on the defensive front. And then, of course, you look at Nick Herbig. Man, I look at Nebraska's offensive line issues this season. And then you bring in a Wisconsin defense with the guy who leads the conference in sacks right now, and Nick Herbig. That seems like a recipe for disaster. That seems maybe like a recipe for a re-injury to Casey Thompson. Will it be? But they're going to have to figure something out on their offensive line, Nebraska is, because if they can't figure out what's happening on the O-line right now, boy, that's going to be really, really tough for them to contain. That's going to be really tough for them to keep up with what Nick Herbig and this defense is doing right now. They continue to get better and better and better. But the big question I have in this game, let's start first for Wisconsin. Can this running game get back on track, right? This Iowa defense, we know how good they are. We know how good the Hawkeye defense is against the run. I'll talk about Iowa here as the show progresses. But when I look at Wisconsin right now, they need to be able to run the football. I think they can run the football. Yes, the Nebraska front is playing better. I don't think there's any question about that. Nebraska is definitely playing better on the defensive side of the ball, and they're definitely playing better against the run right now. But the big question for Nebraska is, can they contain Braylon Allen? Can they contain Isaac Guerendo right now? Look, I know before this matchup against Iowa, Wisconsin was doing a great job running the football. It looked like we were getting to back to Badger football, and now look, they're gonna need to run it. I just don't know if this Nebraska defense is where they need to be right now in order to kind of rein in what Wisconsin is going to try to do on offense. Now, remember last year, boy, the numbers escape my mind, but Braylon Allen ran for some ridiculous number against this Huskers defense in what was another one-score loss at that point for Nebraska in the 2021 Scott Frost coached Nebraska Cornhuskers. But when I look at this game, for Wisconsin, I see just hand it off. Okay, I think the running game is going to be able to do their thing. I think the running game is going to be able to do exactly what they want. So that's kind of how I see this game going on. You look at Garrett Nelson, you look at O'Shawn Mathis, you look at Caleb Tanner kind of coming off the edge right now, and you ask yourself, is this a team? Is this a situation where Nebraska can come off the edge and make things happen? That's what we need to ask ourselves right now. Can they attack the Wisconsin offensive tackles? Because, man, if Nebraska can't play well, if they can't play sound in the interior, it's hard for me to imagine. It's really hard for me to imagine this game going any other way, and that Wisconsin controls the time of possession, even if Casey Thompson is playing right now. Even if Casey is able to go, it's very difficult for me to imagine this Nebraska team. Look, because this Wisconsin defense continues to get better and better and better. I love what Wisconsin's doing in the secondary. I think Wisconsin's got to do one thing. Okay, we got to key in on Trey Palmer. We can't let him have a big day. We can't let him have a day like he had against the Purdue Boilermakers. I think that's what needs to happen right now. Because, if you let Trey Palmer loose, a lot of other guys are going to get open as well. So that's got to be the Wisconsin, that's got to be what Wisconsin needs to do, I should say, going forward, is they need to clue in on what Nebraska is doing on the offensive side of the football. Okay, so that's what we got for Wisconsin and Nebraska. Just looking at some other games this week. Of course, Illinois and Michigan, got a preview of that game on the channel right now, so check that out if you haven't already. But, man, this is a battle of two running games. TBD about Chase Brown right now. I mean, yeah, if Chase Brown isn't able to go, then, yeah, this could be a Michigan drubbing. Who knows? It might be a Michigan drubbing anyway. But here's one thing to keep in mind. You got Ohio State coming around the corner. You got Ohio State next week. Can you find a way to stay focused and not let Illinois kind of come up and bite you in the butt? I think that's exactly it. Michigan has got to stay focused. Jim Harbaugh has got to keep this team focused. Because if Michigan comes out and they're lackadaisical and Illinois maybe forces a turnover, then we could have a game on our hands between the Illini and the Wolverines. I don't think there's any question about that. But if Illinois, or I should say if Michigan knows, hey, this is a good Illinois team. Look, they might not have played well the past couple of weeks. Yeah, maybe some of their goals are kind of slipping right now. But it's really hard to see Illinois going into the Big House and playing a game against Michigan where they can really go head-to-head with them. It's just hard for me to imagine that. Maybe it could happen. I think if it does happen, Michigan has kind of come out flat, maybe not ready to play, maybe looking ahead, that kind of thing right now. So that's kind of where I see that going on. Let's kind of go down, kind of talk more about some of these games. We've got Iowa taking on Minnesota right now. Man, here in the Twin Cities, it's been snowing all week. It's been cold. It's been good old-fashioned Big Ten West type of weather. You got to love it. You got to love that Big Ten West type of weather, right? Man, preview, once again, just like Michigan, Illinois, preview of this game is on the channel, so make sure you go and check that out. Man, I just don't know which way. I mean, Mohamed Ibrahim, offensive line, is really good for Minnesota, and then when I look at the Hawkeyes, they've been doing really good against the run. I mean, I see this coming from both sides right now. Like, this could be a big-time, just beefy, big, playing for some pork kind of game. Like 10-7, 7-3. I don't think those scores are out of the question. I don't think here in Minneapolis, just 20, 25 minutes down the road from the Big Ten studios, I just don't think right now Minnesota is, I don't know, it's tough. It's tough. It's going to be a great game, but who does anybody score in these type of conditions where it's 15 degrees at kickoff? Does anybody score more than 20 points? The winner. Does the winner score more than 20 points? I don't know. That is a fantastic, fantastic question. We've got celebrities on the show. Greg Flukar from College Football Peak around the corner saying, "Go Gophers, Sky you ma, and row the darn boat." That's what he's saying. It's been a while since Minnesota has taken home the Floyd of Rosedale. They haven't done it since, well, before P.J. Fleck was head coach. I want to say 2014, 2015. I believe it's been seven in a row for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Like, that's kind of been the one thing that I said this in my preview. I said it just a little bit in my preview. I didn't really expand on it a ton. I guess I'll expand on it now. That's kind of one thing that P.J. Fleck hasn't done a couple of things. Look, he's done a lot of things. He hasn't won the Big Ten West, and he hasn't beaten Iowa. Like, that's where the flaws in the game, I think, start and end, so to speak, with P.J. Fleck right now. Because, man, he wants to beat Iowa, right? Take the timeouts home with him, that kind of thing. Remember those comments that were made when Minnesota was taking a bunch of timeouts in a previous meeting between the Hawkeyes and the Gophers? Oh, man. So that's kind of where we're at right now. I believe that this is going to be a smash mouth game. And this is kind of an elimination game in the Big Ten West. Minnesota needs more to happen outside of their control than the Iowa Hawkeyes do right now. Iowa sits in a pretty good position right now in the Big Ten West. And here's a comment. Why is Purdue ahead of Iowa in the standings? Are they? Let's see if I can do some tiebreakers in my head. Let's see if I remember these tiebreakers. Let's see. Iowa has a head-to-head 24-3 victory over Purdue. I believe they both have 3 conference losses. I know Illinois is ahead of them. I'd have to pull it up. I'd have to see that. But I think Iowa has a better chance right now to go to Indianapolis than Purdue. I believe Purdue needs a lot more to happen. There's so many, because Purdue has the head-to-head over Northwestern, which is exactly why our buddy Greg is saying, go Northwestern and beat Purdue. So that's happening over there. So we'll see. There's a lot of tiebreakers. There's a lot of things that can happen. There's so many scenarios that still exist out there. But kind of circling back here to Iowa and Minnesota. Look, this is a game and this is a matchup where I think both teams want to keep the ball out of the hands of their quarterback. And I think they want to put the ball into the hands of their running back. When I look at Caleb Johnson for Iowa, when I look at Mohamed Ibrahim for Minnesota, I think that's where I see a lot of this kind of going either way right now is you want to run the football. You want to play great defense. Who's going to do that the best? I think Minnesota has the better offensive line right now than the Iowa Hawkeyes. We'll see if that continues. We'll see, if that ends up being the case as we continue down the road. But, man, this is going to be a great matchup. Defense, running game, who's going to be able to do it better? If anybody else has some audio out of sync issues like Jeff commented, make sure you let me know. This is kind of my first live stream down here, so it could be something with the network, could be something else that I got going on here as well. So if you've got that issue, please let me know as well so I can maybe get that fixed eventually. Some other matchups in the Big Ten. Is Ohio State and Maryland going to be competitive? Like Buckeyes down Mayan Williams at the running back position. This is a team that hasn't really run the ball all that well. Look, Maryland has really been struggling on offense. I know the weather. Look, as soon as the weather really got cold for the Maryland Terrapins, I think that's when things really started to go down south. This team is not built for Big Ten November weather. I don't think there's any doubt about that. You look at Ohio State, and look, I'm not sitting here and saying that this is going to be a competitive game because I don't think it is. I think Ohio State is the better team, and I think they will be and prove that they are the better team. But Maryland continues to struggle. I think as we kind of get down later in the season, this could be another 7-5 type of performance for the Maryland Terrapins. It really could be. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how Maryland is kind of viewed. If they end up going 7-5 and then they would lose to Ohio State, they beat Rutgers in the finale once again, because I really thought Maryland would take some jumps forward. I projected them to be 8-4 at the beginning of the season. And, yeah, they had a good win against Michigan State here kind of earlier on, but I don't know. We'll see how things go. But Ohio State, this is a game where you got to really perfect some things. You got to get all your receivers involved. You got to gain a lot of confidence, just like Michigan. You got to gain a lot of confidence down the stretch in this game against Maryland if you think you're going to have a good chance to really play head-to-head against Michigan. And right now that looks like a battle of behemoths between the Wolverines and the Buckeyes. That should be a really, really good matchup. Really looking forward to that one. It should be a lot, and I mean a lot of fun between the Wolverines and the Buckeyes. It'd be great for the Big Ten if those two teams are 11-0. And we'll see what happens this weekend. There's still a lot of football to be played. Really, 3 weeks of football to be played if you include conference championship games. We could see a one-loss. I think you in order for a one-loss Big Ten non-champion to get in, I think that Ohio State-Michigan game has to be razor thin. I think it's got to be less than a touchdown. I think it's got to be 4 points, 3 points, something like that. Really close game where you say, oh, this could have gone either way. This could have gone this way. This could have gone that way. Stuff like that. So I would love to see two Big Ten teams. Wouldn't you love to see two Big Ten teams, two SEC teams in some form or combination, between the two? That would be superb. That would be very, very interesting to see that. The two best conferences in the country battle it out to see who really is the best and who really reigns supreme. I mean, you got games like Northwestern and Purdue, Penn State and Rutgers, Indiana, Michigan State, where the home teams, well, not Rutgers, Penn State, but Purdue at home and then Michigan State at home, where those teams should take care of business right now. So Mel Tucker's doing a great job, a great coaching job at Michigan State right now. Of course, he had that great season last year, but where he's been able to get this team back from where they were early in the season, the whole tunnel situation, how he's kind of pulling them out of the depths of the well right now is very, very impressive. So good on you, Mel Tucker, for what's happening right now. Northwestern, Purdue. Look, we've had an inconsistency with Purdue, I think, has been the big issue right now. But I think last week they found some good stuff. They found the running game with Devin Maccabee. Okay, they found some balance with Aiden O'Connell. I think all season long, ever since Devin Maccabee really burst on the scene in the middle of the year, I really thought a balanced attack was the way to go for Purdue. Some of these games, they just like to throw it around in the air. They really threw it around in that really gusty winds against Iowa, which was an interesting strategy, to put it kindly. But, man, Purdue's one of those teams that's going to be right there, right in contention in the Big Ten West. Very much looking forward to seeing the Big Ten West develop kind of as we progress here. I want to talk about Matt Rhule for a minute. Matt Rhule is a candidate to be the head coach at the University of Nebraska. There's been a lot of buzz surrounding the Nebraska head coaching opening right now. So the big question for me is, who's the best guy? The best guy is who can perform this rebuild. I think Nebraska needs experiences with they need a guy with experience that has an experience with a rebuild. Matt Rhule has that. Remember, he rebuilt Temple from a 1-win team. He rebuilt Baylor from 2-ish wins. Like, this is a team, this is a guy in Matt Rhule that has this experience. Now, even though his NFL experience did not go very well, I think, to say the least, this is a guy, when it comes to college football, Baylor was a physical team when he was playing there and when he was coaching there. I think Matt Rhule is a really good option. And no matter who gets hired as the next head coach in Nebraska, I think Mickey Joseph has to factor into the plans big time. Big time. Because what Mickey has been able to do in recruiting with some of these guys, bringing in these 4-star guys, high 3-star guys in Nebraska already, that have said publicly the reason I'm coming to Nebraska is because Mickey Joseph, I think it would be a fool's errand to try to rebuild this roster without Mickey Joseph. I think he's one of the best position coaches, one of the best wide receivers coaches, one of the best recruiters in the country right now. So you got to utilize him. You got to utilize everything that he kind of stands for right now in building up that program. And look at Trey Palmer and how he's evolved under the coaching of Mickey Joseph. And even though maybe the wide receivers haven't looked outstanding, I believe Mickey's a big part of this. Matt Rhule, when you talk about Fitz a weird one, because look, a lot of people said when Brian Kelly got hired at LSU, says, well, he doesn't fit in the SEC. He's a Midwestern guy. He's a Northern guy. You know who else was from the North? Nick Saban. Coached at Michigan State before coming to LSU. Michigan State, did some stuff in the MAC, I believe. He's from West Virginia. Like, let's stop pigeonholing people into these areas just because they're from a different area. Like that's kind of where I see this. That's kind of where I'm coming from. And when I look at Matt Rhule, I believe he can be successful. Look, I believe a lot of guys can be successful at Nebraska. Okay, I don't think the talent was the problem. The talent was not the problem at Nebraska. You look back on Scott Frost's recruiting classes, they're top 5 in the Big Ten and they're top 25 nationally. But it was retaining that talent and developing that talent. So you need to look at a guy because, you look at Scott Frost. Maybe the jury's out on where he ranks as a recruiter. But, you look at a lot of these guys, Kleiman, Leipold, Rhule. You look at all these guys and, a lot of them kind of sit there and they say, why can't these guys be successful? Why can't Matt Rhule, Lane Kiffin, Kleiman, all of these guys can be successful? I don't think there's any doubt about it. They can all be really good coaches at Nebraska. It's just, can that talent, what I'm saying is they can bring in the talent, can they develop the talent? And I believe that a lot of these guys can develop that talent. It would be interesting to see Lane Kiffin coming to Nebraska. Look at that. Look at Casey Thompson. Look at Trey Palmer. Look at all these guys. Look at all these weapons that exist right now at Nebraska. And then you put Lane Kiffin and this type of explosive offense in that system. That could be very, very interesting. to see. It's not something the Big Ten would actually have to adapt to, unlike what Scott Frost put on the field. So that'll be interesting. But I believe Matt Rhule and what I saw of him coaching at Baylor, how I saw him develop players, how I saw him, they had a physical team, a tough team, a good defense. I think that can translate with what Trev Alberts wants at Nebraska. I really believe that, and I think Matt Rhule can be a good fit. Now, since Matt Rhule is available, and according to sources, they haven't offered a contract to anybody, it makes me think that they can go out there and swing bigger. Because if Matt Rhule was no doubt about it, who they wanted, we love this guy, blah, 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 blah. One, they probably would have offered him by now. And two, he might have taken the job by now. So there might be hesitance on both sides. So maybe that tells me that Matt Rhule isn't a home run hire as of right now. Not saying he can't be a good hire, not saying he can't be a good coach. It's just maybe Trev Alberts wants to take some time. And, maybe if you're kind of looking on it, yeah, it would give you a leg up in recruiting to kind of keep guys. It would give them a longer time period for Matt Rhule to build a staff, all that stuff. But even though there's a quick turnaround, I think what you really want is you want to test the market. You want to swing big. Maybe you can go out and get one of these really big names. Maybe you can go out and get some things done and convince someone crazy, someone we're not even thinking about right now, to leave their job and come to Lincoln, Nebraska. Maybe that could happen. Who knows? Who knows? Should be interesting to see what happens at Nebraska. Big Ten West, because that's kind of where the battle is right now in the Big Ten West. I'm going to pull up some standings here so I have a reference of what's going on out west right now. You've got 4 teams sitting at 4-3. Illinois, Iowa, Purdue, and Minnesota. I said it in a video earlier. I think Iowa has the best road. Do you want to say easiest? Because playing Minnesota on the road ain't easy. In 15-degree weather, that ain't easy. I'll tell you that much. Okay? So, but, you look, they got to play Minnesota on the road, then they get Nebraska at home. You look at some of these other games. Illinois on the road to Michigan, got to play Northwestern. You look at Purdue. Yeah, well, you talk about an easy road. Maybe it is the Purdue Boilermakers right now, but they don't have the head-to-heads. They don't have the head-to-head against Iowa. They don't have the head-to-head against Minnesota. The only head-to-head they have is against the Illinois Fighting Illini. I think Purdue will win the remainder of their 2 games. I think Purdue is going to finish 6-3 in conference, and they're going to finish 8-4 overall, which I think is a good season for Purdue. All things considered, in the middle of the year, they weren't looking so hot in the middle of the season. So I look at Purdue, they're 6-3. I think Illinois is going to split. They'll end up 5-4 in conference. I look at Iowa. Man, you go on the road to Minnesota. If they lose to the Gophers, that really creates some big-time issues. Because if Minnesota's able to win, then you got to go on the road to Camp Randall. And if they split, say Minnesota wins and then they lose, they're 5-4. Iowa, say they lose to Minnesota and beat Minnesota, say they split, they would also be 5-4. So you've got the Hawkeyes at 5-4. You'd have Minnesota at 5-4. You'd have Illinois at 5-4. Purdue, 6-3, Big Ten West champs. Getting Purdue to the Big Ten championship game right now, I don't think it's that far-fetched right now, because Minnesota's got to beat Iowa. Minnesota then would lose to Wisconsin. You just got to get a bunch of 5-4 teams. Illinois loses to Michigan. They come back and they beat Northwestern. Every team. Illinois has got to lose to Michigan. Iowa's got to lose to Minnesota. Minnesota's got to lose to Wisconsin. You get a whole mess of 5-4 teams. Look at Purdue. You got Northwestern and Indiana, 2 of the worst teams right now in the Big Ten Conference. All you got to do is beat them. All you got to do is take care of business. Now, if then you kind of go deeper and if Iowa's able to win, then they got to lose to Nebraska. I don't think it's that far-fetched right now to see Purdue playing in Indianapolis. I really think that Purdue can play in Indianapolis. Greg says Purdue does have the head-to-head with Minnesota. Minnesota needs Purdue to lose a game. So now we're talking about Minnesota. How do the Gophers get in? Oh, man, for Minnesota, they lost to Purdue, got to beat Iowa, lost to Illinois. So it's harder. Yeah, you are going to need a Purdue loss. And I think if Purdue loses, I'd probably say Indiana. But who knows? Maybe Northwestern could come up. Maybe Northwestern can bite you. Maybe you get a weather game. I'm not sure how the weather is supposed to be where they're playing this week. But, who knows? You never know. Maybe in a year where things are kind of going sideways, maybe Fitzy pulls one out and he finally gets a win on American soil this season. So, it should be very interesting to see how that all plays out. But considering those scenarios, considering kind of where we're at right now, man, it seems to me it's Iowa or Purdue. Because if Iowa is able to defeat Minnesota and then they play Nebraska, even if Casey Thompson's back, I still feel that Iowa defense is going to clamp down and they're going to stop Nebraska. And I just feel very strongly that Iowa is going to be able to beat Nebraska right now. So I think Iowa at the very worst splits right now. And then Purdue, you got a couple of layups. Okay, I know Purdue loves to shoot the three. I know Purdue loves to chuck it up from downtown, Matt Painter boys. But when I look at this, they're sitting right there. And I think a lot of people are talking about Iowa, Minnesota. A lot of people are talking about Illinois and Michigan. People might be talking about other games right now. I don't know. It's going to be a fun couple of weeks. And I think a lot of it is going to be determined this week because when I look at the rivalry week games, I look at Iowa looks like a much better team than Nebraska. Minnesota and Wisconsin, they could have a lot on the line. The Badgers need, I think I read kind of the what-if scenarios. Wisconsin basically needs to win out. Basically, everybody else needs to lose somehow. But Wisconsin still does have a chance right now. If they beat Minnesota in a head-to-head, they beat Purdue in a head-to-head, and those are the only teams kind of in the race that they have head-to-head victories over since they did lose to Iowa and Illinois. Lewis kind of brings up a good point. These West Division teams are going to battle it out. They're going to put it all out on the line to try to get to Indianapolis. Then what? Then you got to play Ohio State. You got to play Michigan. Two of the very best teams in the country, two national championship caliber teams. I think, look, we're going to have fun the next couple of weeks kind of debating and kind of looking at what's going to happen to the Big Ten West, and it's going to be a lot of fun to see what's happening right now in the Big Ten West. But you kind of look at some of these teams, like you look at Iowa against Michigan. You see a rematch of the Hawkeyes and the Wolverines. You don't think Michigan can win that game going away again? Tell me how Iowa is a better team. Tell me how Iowa is a better matchup this year than last year. I don't think, you know what I mean? It's just, there's not a lot of, you kind of keep on going down the list. Purdue against Michigan. It kind of depends what Purdue team we get. If we get a healthy Purdue team, if we get an Aiden O'Connell playing at his best, if we get Devin Maka be able to run the football, well, they might be able to stay in it for a half, maybe 3/4, but Michigan is so tough and Michigan has so much more endurance. I just don't think it's going to happen. You just keep on going down the list, and there's so many scenarios. And at one point in the season, I look at all these teams, maybe except Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Purdue, and Minnesota. I looked at all of those teams at one point or another in the season. I'm like, oh, that's a good team. That's a 10-win team. That's a 9 or 10-win team. That's a good team. That's a top 15. That's a top 10 team. Okay, there were points in the season for all of those schools that I really thought. Illinois, up until maybe 2 weeks ago, I thought, man, they were ranked 15th, 16th, 15th, or whatever in the college football playoff rankings. They were right there. They were right on their way. You look at Iowa. Maybe Iowa is sitting there right now. the way Iowa's playing, or maybe a couple of weeks back, those back-to-back games, what was it, Northwestern and Purdue. I think it was after the Purdue game, I was really high on Iowa. Hey, maybe if they would have played better, they'd be in a better situation right now, or played better early in the season. Okay, man, really like Iowa. Minnesota. Earl, man, we were looking, Tanner Morgan was throwing it around, but after Chris Altman-Bell went down, they just didn't have a number one target. Okay, all those guys in that Minnesota wide receiving core right now are complimentary guys. They're not number one guys. They're not guys that you're going to look to go to all the time. So I think that's kind of a problem right now for Minnesota. So, all of those teams right now they all have their issues. They all have their issues kind of right now, but hey, it's our Big Ten West race, and we are loving it. Ohio State definitely nervous if they have to play Purdue. Right? I was talking about Michigan matchups, but what about Ohio State? Very interesting here from Robert. OSU should win, but they'll have nightmares. Ooh, Halloween. Ohio State. If they can't run the ball, okay, you look at this. This is kind of an interesting point that we can go off of. This is why we do the live streams. This is why we interact. This is why we have a live chat, so we can kind of go off and go down the rabbit hole, so to speak, okay? So, Ohio State. Who matches up the best? Illinois, Iowa, Purdue, Minnesota. Well, I want to look at the team that has a better run defense, that kind of forces them to throw the ball. Now, once they are a great passing attack, there's no question about that. Like, look at that Iowa game earlier this season. This was in Columbus. Iowa was forcing Ohio State to kick field goal after field goal after field goal. If they had any offense, that would have been a game probably deep into the third quarter. Because if they had any offense, they would have been able to come back those field goals with either matching field goals or maybe even touchdowns and take the lead. But they didn't have an offense. Has the offense gotten better? I believe it's gotten a little bit better at Iowa. Has it gotten better enough where you can say, yeah, they can go head-to-head with Ohio State? I don't think they can. They don't have the offense. You got a Heisman-caliber quarterback on one end, and, well, you got Spencer Petras on the other end. So you tell me, right? Purdue, like, this is kind of what Robert said. When I look at Purdue and I look at their chances, I say, what Purdue team are we getting? Are we getting a Purdue team that refuses to run the football and keeps on throwing it and wears out Aiden O'Connell's arm? Or are we getting a Purdue team that's balanced, that plays better in the defensive front? Okay, which team are we getting? Which version of the Boilermakers are we getting? I think that's the big question I have with the Purdue Boilermakers. What can we do? What can they do? I think that's the big question right now for Purdue. Could they match up against Ohio State? Sure. What I want to see from a guy who flies the flag, who loves the conference, and has always loved the conference, I want to see a good matchup. Okay, I want to see competition on one hand. On the other hand, I kind of want to see the winner of the East kind of take care of business and prove that they belong in the college football playoff national championship conversation. So, there's so many teams in here, look, that are sitting right there, right above 500, 7-3. I think you've got, a lot of people are kind of talking trash right now about the Big Ten West, and people can say what they want. But look at your division. Set two teams at 7-3, two teams at 6-4. You got a team of Wisconsin sitting there at 5-5. Like, there's a good chance that all of those teams, like if Wisconsin takes care of business against Nebraska, they're going to be a bowl team. You'd have 5 bowl teams right now in one division. Okay? Look, I'm not saying 6-6 should be the measure of success. Okay? It should be a measure of mediocrity. It should be like, okay, we made a bowl game. If you're rebuilding a team, or it depends what your goals are as a program, I guess. Like Rutgers, 6 or 7 wins a year, they'd be very happy with that. You look at Wisconsin, 6 to 7 wins a year, coach might get fired. Even after 8 wins, even after 9 wins, 10 wins, your coach might get fired. We just want to see one thing, Robert. Good officiating. Yeah, well, go to another conference, I guess. I don't know. No, I'm kidding. But, it's been an issue in some of these games. I think there's the same crew. I can't remember the game off the top of my head. It was this last week. I was out of town, and I just caught some of the games. So I wasn't able to catch all of them. But there was one game I heard that had the same officiating crew as the Illinois-Indiana that blew up some bad calls earlier this season. So they kind of they officiated the Illinois game. It must have been Illinois-Purdue. That must have been the same crew, and yeah, just didn't work out. Just didn't work out. But we'll see. Hopefully they get it together. That's got to be a point of emphasis for Kevin Warren at the conference office. You got to think going forward is we need to get better officiated. We can't have these games kind of come down to this calls, because that Illinois-Indiana game earlier in the season, that should have went Illinois' way. Like there's no doubt about that. They had touchdowns taken off the board when the touchdown shouldn't have been taken off of the board. Here's Jeff saying, is it even worth it for any team to win the West when they get thumped in Indy, creating bad vibes, going into a bowl game, not to mention chances for more injuries? Well, that kind of gets us to another point. It kind of gets us to, I heard today the SEC sounds like they're going to go to divisionless football starting next season. Thought it was next season. I could be wrong on that. In the very near future. So that would put the SEC, the ACC, the Big 12, and the Pac-12 as conferences that don't have divisions, leaving only the Big 10. Kevin Warren says they've been talking about that. They've been working. They're going to stick with divisions for 2023. So we're going to have everybody's favorite Big 10 West still in 2023. But my guess is when USC and hopefully UCLA join the conference in 2024, that's when we could see something. And that's when we could see go to one division. Now, there are some downsides to a one division format. I think right now in the Big Ten, you could get an Ohio State, Michigan rematch from week to the next week. The rematches, does it lose its luster? Like if this season, and Robert, I'm going to get to your point in just a little bit here. Like this season, you've got Michigan and Ohio State. Like this season would be a perfect example. You've got Michigan and Ohio State both at 7-0. Okay? Next best team is Penn State at 5-2, and then you got a bunch of that we talked about it before. It's 5-2 and then 4-3. Yeah. This season, Ohio State would play Michigan in Columbus. Okay? And then these two teams would match up again in the Big Ten championship game. So where does that leave us? Positives and negatives. Well, like you get in a situation where maybe the regular season matchup between Michigan and Ohio State is just not as meaningful. Okay, because they know they've got the Big Ten championship in Indianapolis on the neutral site that really, they got a rematch the next week. Like if you lose, Michigan loses, they're 11-1, they play on a neutral site, they come back and beat them, now it's a draw. Okay, now you got both Ohio State and Michigan sitting there at 12-1. I'm not sure if that's the way to do it. I mean, I see that's the way college football is going right now. I think there's other ways you could maybe do it. One idea I thought of was you could trim your conference schedule down to 8 games, and your 9th conference game would be a Big Ten semifinals. So you'd kind of like the college football playoff. You'd play 1 versus 4 in the standings. You'd play 2 versus 3 in the standings. And then you'd kind of all the other games, because, you don't want to lose out on a conference game. All those other teams would kind of match up. Maybe you do 5 versus 6, 7 versus 8, and whatever, however you want to do that. It would just keep trickling down. So that's an option. You could do somewhat of you don't have to keep the names, but a legends and leaders type of scenario where you have maybe every 2 or 3 years, you kind of do a competitive balance. You want to keep, and maybe I kind of thought of this, balanced divisions, but you have to bring your rival with you. So there's almost like a divisional draft, like, Ohio State and Michigan are a pair. Michigan State and Penn State are a pair. Nebraska and Iowa are a pair. Wisconsin and Minnesota are a pair where you take one, I take one. You take one, I take one. Or the Big Ten just evenly distributes them. So every few years, the divisions are even. And you got to try to retain those rivalries. Like we just talked about it. How do you retain Minnesota and Iowa? How do you retain Michigan and Michigan State? I think the scheduling would have to get really flexible. I think you got to have teams that say, we got to play our partner and we got to play maybe one other team. So you have two protected rivals, so to speak. If your protected rival is within your division, then great. So be it. That's why a balanced division kind of going back and forth. I don't know. That's just kind of one thing that I've thought of. But it just appears in the world of college football that we are going to a divisionless world. That's kind of the vibe I get right now. And then how each conference structures. It wouldn't surprise me to see conferences drop a conference game in the regular season, do a playoffs, where you got 1 versus 4 and 2 versus 3, maybe on a home field. Wouldn't that be fun? With a whole lot on the line. Yeah, you're still going to get, like, no matter what. Okay, if you're doing 1 versus 2, 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3, no matter what, you're still going to get rematches. Like, it's going to be, I think it's going to be tough. It's going to be extremely difficult the way things are set up right now in the Big Ten Conference. Michigan and Ohio State are very dominant. How do you try to get around that? I don't know. It's hard. Maybe there's ideas that I'm just not thinking of right now that could work, but I just don't know right now. So that's kind of one thing to keep an eye on as we continue to go on in this future. So Big Ten right now is really the only conference. I think by the time 2024, 2025 rolls around, I think we're going to have a better idea of how we determine conference champions. Of course, conference realignment will have a big say in all of that. College football, big time changes coming up. There's no question about that. But it should be fun to kind of keep an eye on. We're going to have some great games this Saturday. Boy, it is sure going to be fun. I will tell you that much. Iowa taking on Minnesota. I think Wisconsin and Nebraska. That game really, the anticipation and excitement for that game really went through the roof. So that's going to be fun. There's just going to be a lot of fun here this Saturday. With that, I think I'm going to wrap up this live stream. Thank you, everybody, for kind of coming aboard here on late notice. Appreciate it. Mark Edwards leaving us with straight facts here tonight. It's going to be epic. Next week, Ohio State, Michigan, the game is well on the horizon. Will the Buckeyes trip up against Maryland? Will Michigan trip up against Illinois? Both teams got to be ready and focus and try to build confidence and try to build momentum towards the finish in the Big Ten Conference. So with that, I want to thank you for joining me on Big Ten Ted Live. Sorry about the postponement from yesterday, late. Things are scrambling, trying to get this office set up down here. But thanks, everybody, for tuning into the live stream. Going to have reaction videos to all sorts of games. I'm going to be sitting down watching a lot of football this Saturday. And we're going to find out. We're going to find out in about 48 hours or so what the Big Ten West looks like. Are both Michigan and Ohio State going to be 11-0? Should be pretty fun. Come back to the channel. Always hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Until next time, I'm Big Ten Ted, and we will see you in the next one.